a beautiful morning, sort of almost noon here in the forest. It's some snow on the ground, a little bit raining, very gently, and walking here to talk about today's topic that I wanted to address. I came upon a really great diagram describing something that I consider lost to philosophy, and that's the heart of the philosopher. So if you look into philosophy from a perspective of the 21st century, if you look at it from academic perspective as well, usually what happens to you if you go and study philosophy, you start somewhere. It's sort of like history, and it's more relates to, and it seems to be more like a history of philosophy that you are learning than philosophy itself. Start to the pre-Socratics, go to the Socratics, Middle Ages, Descartes, and Kant, and so on, existentialists. And you build up, and you build up on your knowledge. But there is one thing that this academic approach from modern times is completely missing, and it has to do with something that happened quite early in the development of philosophy between the antique and the Middle Ages. Because if you remember, like, philosophy means philosophia, that means love of wisdom. Now, Sophia itself, in a broader meaning, is not just the wisdom, but it's as well the goddess, feminine aspect of wisdom. And what does it mean that this is a feminine aspect? In the symbolism that starts already in the antique, in ancient Egypt, in especially the Hermetical traditions, the feminine aspect, or the positive feminine aspect that they saw, and then it coded into, for example, the tarot cards, into later alchemy. The feminine aspect is mercy. And mercy is a really important concept from this perspective, because mercy is something that you get bestowed upon you. It's not something that you can achieve by yourself. And that is the split that we saw early in philosophy between the rational part of philosophy and the part of the philosophy that cannot be reached with reason, which can be then described as reached through the mercy. And what happened in this time between the classical era, the ancient era, and the early Middle Ages was, once Rome conquered the Euro-Asian part of the world, North Africa, Middle East as we call it today, and obviously they conquered Greece. And Greek slaves were highly valued for their have been strong educators. Since Alexander the Great conquered from the Mediterranean Sea to what is today's Afghanistan, one of the things that he managed to do was not just military conquer. I don't think he would be called great just for bringing the Persian Empire to the knees at that time. The thing that he did, being a student of Aristotle, because remember, Philip, second father of Alexander, was keen on his education, though Alexander was more keen in dodging education, but still, Philip of Macedon hired Aristotle, who was the student of Plato, who was the student of Socrates, to educate him. So when Alexander has gone on his conquest missions, he took philosophers, cartographers, and scientists with him. Therefore, we have so many Alexandria cities. We came in, he built a city. The city was by a certain standard. It has a gymnasium, it has a library. So what he did was spreading culture, and with culture as well education. What this meant is that Greek became the Libra Franca of that part of the world that was previously conquered. So you could speak on royal courts Greek from India to North Africa to Andalusia. And this was important because that meant that works written in Greek could be read all across this part of the world. And that was a heritage of the Greek culture, the ancient Greek culture. So when Romans conquered the known world today, to them the known world, to the Romans the known, then they kept and they encountered Greek language being this diplomatic, this intellectual language. Right? They spoke Roman and they conversed in Romans, and you have the texts written in Roman, but still books, publishing and so on kept being done in Greek. And in between these times we had the emerge of early Christianities because there was no formal Christianity sort of made at that time. If you look into 2nd century, 3rd century Christianic texts, especially if you go outside what was later canonized as the Bible, you see Gospels of Mary, Gospels of Thomas, very, very different perspectives of what they call Jesus. And as well, it's a time where the church fathers are fighting each other with you are a heretic, no, you are a heretic, and you don't understand it, and I understand it better, and this is the right life of Christ, and this is not. So there was a lot of dispute, but it was already getting this religious point. At the same time, in parallel, we had two philosophers, beyond many others, that we call today Neoplatonists. Plotinus being one of them, and then his student who compiled his work being the second. The student then wrote a significant book called Against Christians, which was a philosophical level of argument against Christianity, and it was, I think, 15 volumes. So impactful that Constantine banned it, made it illegal to read, and one emperor later or two emperors later, they actually collected all the books and burned them when Christianity became the official religion of the Roman Empire. At that time it was then the East Roman Empire. So why I'm mentioning that? So you had philosophers that argued against religion. That's nothing really new. They have been called Neoplatonists. What does it mean? So that means that they took the concept of ideas, something immaterial, from Plato and built upon it. So Plotinus basically developed a cosmology, metaphysical cosmology. And his student, in his work, even uses the word God. So in their concept, the universe, or God, is an entity, is one overarching entity. But they never adhere to religion. Some of Plotinus' students more or less were valuing the Hellenistic religion for various reasons, especially because it was not exclusive. So new thoughts could be born, new paths could be walked, contrary to monotheistic religions that are really, really exclusive. So you either follow or you don't. And from the philosophers of that time, a religion that is built upon obedience, where the ascendance of a being is defined by his level of obedience, was ridiculous. So what is now the lost part of philosophy that after this time got lost because of a certain split? Now, if I say lost, it doesn't mean in absolute sense. Especially philosophers of, for example, the Muslim era between the Baghdadi translation school, Al-Farabi, up to the mystics like Al-Arabi, and so on, between, like, say, 800 till 1300 Common Era time. We definitely have philosophers that are again working this path together. So what was lost in this early Christianity time, when Christianity became the religion of Rome? And I'm not saying it is because of Christianity, I'm just saying that there is this this relation in time. So what philosophers were doing, and what still is then visible in the philosophers of Islam, the mystics, the sages, and especially you can see it in, for example, European thinkers in alchemy. For them, the human wasn't a tool of the god to just follow. For them it was about development, about cultivation. So from a philosophical perspective, they obviously valued very much the rational mind, but at the same time, what they did was they understood that the rational mind has its limits, and that describing and trying to grasp the world with the rational purely will never be successful. They saw the world as an imperfection, in a sense that the material world will be always impure, in a sense of imperfect. Material just the case, so it's never perfect. Therefore, everything materially living decays and is never perfect, and therefore the ascension to purification. Purification through cultivation. I mean, you can see quite a strong parallel to, for example, Buddhist philosophy here and Buddhist practice. Now, this part has then been lost because when religion took over, it took the part of the beyond rational and monopolized it. So the spiritual of philosophy became religion. And then the whole drama between rational versus religious that we have the disputes and discussions still today continues on. Obviously, this is a deep misunderstanding, because it's not like one is better than the other. It's just that, first of all, obviously you need both, and secondly, what the mind is able to generate, even the smartest minds, be it Plotinus versus, I don't know, Ibn Arabi, their cosmologies vary, although, we know that the works of Plotinus have been translated in the Baghdadi translation movement into Arabic, and Europe became it then through the Arabic writings. We rediscovered the ancient philosophy in the Renaissance. But so obviously Ibn Arabi, being from Andalusia, most probably, I would say definitely, was known and knew the ideas of Plotinus. Right? But the cosmology differs, and it differs because when the human mind tries to express something that's beyond the mind, at best effort it can, it expresses this always from a unique individual perspective. So the reason that the things vary, that the cosmologies vary, is not a contradiction. It just confirms that the experience of the philosopher, of the mystic, is individual, although we could argue the source is universal. So, but what this has in common is it cannot be achieved from the pure rational perspective. And if you look at modern philosophy in particular, you see this strong tendency to argue and build arguments. Everything needs to be rational. Everything needs to be defendable in a sense of, I write an argument and I have to prove, and the proof is for everyone and everybody to see with him the same language game that I'm writing in. And the philosophers came to the point where really language, they saw language is not anymore enough, be it Wittgenstein, be it Heidegger. They just came to the point where they realized we need to sort of reinvent the language to actually say what we want to say. And in the end, we don't get to say what we would like to say. And this is something the ancient sages understood since millennia, and therefore they left explicit logical structure of writing in favor of poetry. Because poetry is something that, if you analyze purely grammatically, if you take the words, a dictionary and grammar, it will give you no sense at all. But then you feel the poem and you understand it. And so let me say, for example, poetry of love. If you never laughed, you can read all the poetry. I mean, it will make no sense at all to you. But if you laughed and how you read it, it resonates the feeling of the poet based on his skill in resonance to your personal experience. Right? This is poetry. This is something that transcends language. This is art. And here is where the heart of the philosopher is. Here is where the love to Sophia as knowledge happens. It's not the rational. Obviously you need the rational. But it's beyond. If you transcend the rational, you understand that there are things that cannot be expressed or understood from a purely rational perspective, but they are still resonating within you. And across millennia, we can see across different cultures, different languages, that basically they have the same expression. So to me, they would really pass the test of objectivity, right? As much as objectivity is still a concept, and anyway, sort of laughable. But just to say, for the sake of the argument here. So when religion took over this part, philosophy got a little bit lost. And then when sciences took over even more, the position of philosophy as sort of mother of all sciences became, to defend itself, it started to follow the scientific structure, which I'm not saying it's bad, don't take me wrong, by no means, right? I'm just saying there is something lost from this. You cannot argue philosophy in mathematics, in its complexity. You can convert philosophy into mathematics, you can put philosophical arguments into mathematics, by all means, and it's wonderful. And mathematics being this most precise language that we have. But then at the same time, there are things that you will never be able to express there. I even think you can write a poem in mathematics. But thinking that you could write the overwhelming philosophy of all, like a theory of all, in any language, including mathematics, is impossible. Because it stays purely rational. And this is a transcendence of rational. And the ancient philosophers understood it. When you say philosopher today, it mostly creates the impression or association of a college professor in his cabinet with books writing something. Something that most people don't understand and don't want to even read. But this is sort of a misconception. Philosophers have been previously sages. If you go into alchemy, what they call philosophers is they call humans that work on their transmutation. We have alchemy inner and outer. I don't want to go into too much details, but say that the inner alchemy is basically transmutation of the human. It's this ascension, is this purification into the highest status. Highest has a relative meaning, but it's clearly defined in those texts. And that's the part of the philosopher, and the body is his laboratory, and the mind is as well like the canvas in which everything happens. So the ancient philosophers that I mentioned, they basically saw their work not in the realm of structuring logical arguments purely, obviously that was a part of it, but in the development, in touching the divine, how they call it, or we can call it as well for the lack of better terms. The interesting part is that they developed a cosmology where they even talk about cosmic forces with the term using God, but they don't mean any religion. In a sense, they were agnostic. Not like saying there is this religion and this is true. No, contrary to the agnostics though, they were saying, oh, God definitely exists. It's just so ununderstandable that it makes no sense to say what is his name or who he really is, because that's not for the human to know. For the human, it is to ascend into his presence. And again, like this is the beautiful quote from Ibn Arabi, where he basically is asked while he writing all the books, and he was very productive in writing, I think, one of the most sophisticated, I'm told, I don't speak Arabic, but I'm told, one of the most sophisticated Arabic works at all. And therefore, some of the more orthodox people were always teasing him, saying, hey, you should read more Quran. I mean, he obviously knew it from the back of his mind, right? Because when he writes, he uses so many references to Quranic texts, it's obvious that he has completely memorized it. But they still, yeah, you should read more. And he answers, yeah, why should I read the letters of the beloved when I can dwell in his arms? Right, so here is again this build to the divine, the transcension. And here is the difference between the philosophers thinking with the heart versus one point the religious people that see the religion as something that they need to follow by directives, by dogmas, and versus rational philosophers, purely rational philosophers, who sort of get scared of these beyond rational realms, because it's hard to argue those. I mean, try to peer review those. I mean, have fun with that. But it doesn't mean that it's wrong. And the historical evidence that we have through the millennia of texts all across the world, all across religions, it's Lao Tzu, Zhangsa, on the say ancient Asian side, we see it in the ancient philosophers of Greek. Later it transpires into, like I said, the Neoplatonists. It emerges in the Middle Ages, not only in the philosophy and mysticism or metaphysics of these Arabic thinkers. It comes to Europe as well. It in Renaissance gets a foothold. It's not that it disappeared. It's just, if you look at it from today's perspective, it's really somewhere swept behind the corner in a carpet, like behind the carpet, below the carpet in a corner somewhere. And I argue we really lost an important part of philosophy, where beyond the philosophy that you get academically, which is cultivating your thinking in a rational sense. And again, I'm not speaking against it. I think it's wonderful. I think it's necessary. It develops critical thinking. It allows reflection. It really develops the mind. But it is not the stage where one should end. And that's what the philosophers of the ancient time and what some of the sages that I mentioned saw and argued. They say, no, go beyond. The rationality can bring you only so far. But then you encounter what lies beyond. The first step beyond is art. Be it poetry, be it sculpture, be it painting. One of the reasons why art exists is because it gives a message. You don't even need to be literate to understand a message of an image. I say image speaks 1,000 words. So that's true. So you can share ideas through art, and especially ideas that cannot be really expressed in language. Because language is limited. First of all, it's always individual, and it is imperfect. There are the meaning of the words is given by relations to other words and by the definitions, and based on language, it's more or less imperfect. So, going beyond language is where the philosopher's heart is and beats. This is where you experience. I mean, imagine, try to remember where you have been really happy in your life. And it could happen to you that you've been so happy that for all happiness you couldn't find the words to express your feeling. Right? It's not that you don't have the words, you have the whole vocabulary, but you just understand that at this point, whatever you say will never fully express the feeling of happiness that you might remember or you may just live through. And this is the limitation of language. And with the limitation of language, this is the limitation of the rational mind. And philosophy, from the beginnings, has gone beyond the rational mind. The target was not to write better arguments about being than the author before, or than the colleague in the next room, and then showing your own importance by arguing better or stronger. Obviously, in human society, this form of competition and competitive behavior is natural, but that was never the goal. It was the personal ascension, and then you come to the point where you will not argue anymore because you look at the people and you're like, okay, I mean, first of all, what do I say? And if I say, will they understand it? So yeah, here's my poem, guys. What do you get out of it? And that's it. So what we lost and what I think should get back into philosophy for the sake of humanity is the metaphysics. And with the metaphysics, I really mean the ability to think beyond language. I'm not saying we need more cosmologies and concepts. I mean, that can be a never-ending story. Everybody can create their own, and then they can argue for an alternative who kept it better. It's like putting you on an ocean on a sailboat and saying paint a sunset. If I put 1 million people there to paint the sunset, you get 1 million pictures. How do you argue who who made a better picture? And in the end, no one owns the sunset. And there is nothing like experiencing it firsthand. And this is crucial because as humanity we developed into two extremes. One of the extremes is this absolute rationality, which goes on cost of empathy. And on the other hand, this is this like purely scientific, which had his peak in the positivistic movement. Right? If I cannot calculate it, if I cannot quantify it, then it doesn't exist. The other point is this blind, pure religious perspective, which denies the rationality because the rationality challenges it in a form that it can never defend. And therefore they burned those 15 volumes against Christianity in the 4th century. And they put obedience. But where is the development? So I think for humanity, the lecture of the ancient sages is that you use the rational, yes, based on your culture. Obedience may be a part of the path, because one thing that certain level of obedience brings you is humility, and humility is definitely important and wonderful up to a certain level, right? Because you need as well go beyond humility if you want to publish great ideas. You don't want people that are so humble that they never speak. And then the next point is that this is this development of empathy. Once you go beyond language, once you touch what the ancient philosophers called the divine, ultimately what they all experience is something that, for the lack of better terms in different languages, says something like a unity of being. And once you touch the unity of being, the whole universe becomes one being. So everybody is a is one being from a certain perspective. This builds empathy. And I think for the development of humanity, to getting into the next stages, I think we sort of get to the top of both the rational and both the obedient part. And I think it would be great if the time came for the metaphysical, which will not deny the rational. You always want to still be able to calculate cosmical equations and develop them further and further. And keep in mind, development of physical equations, as much as we think it's a rational process where those thinkers would be sitting over their papers with their equations and just making it happen. If you listen to them, Einstein and others, hey, I was like sleeping and I suddenly woke up and I had it. Right? So there is an irrational process, some conscious process, non-fully cognitive process that helped even develop the modern physics. And we haven't learned or educated our children or learned ourselves of developing the ability to go deeper into these realms beyond language, to actually learn these skills and being in touch with beyond rational. And it shows in history that it's really helping developing the next stages of even the rational and complex items like mathematics and physics. So to wrap it up, I just wanted to say that philosophy, in my perspective, has lost the heart of the philosophers. The heart of the philosophers lies within the realm beyond language, and the ancient philosophers knew about it. I think it's worth developing and learning, going the path beyond, because overall I'm convinced if people start to transcend, if they start to cultivate, humanity starts to cultivate. And who knows what we can get out of it. Thank you for listening.